I'm a pretty big fan of The Legend of Zelda. I've played almost all the games with the exception of a few like Zelda 2, but overall it's been a pretty huge part of my life since my early childhood. I've always thought Link was a pretty cool character and he always stood out in my mind. Maybe it's because we both got called Fairy Boy when we were younger, or maybe it's because I too wish that I could rock a little green dress, leggings, and Ugg boots like he does. But most likely, the element that stood out the most to me was how unique he looked compared to other hero characters on the NES, with things like those big pointy ears and his bright colored clothing. My friend recently got his first ever Legend of Zelda game, which was Breath of the Wild. I was pretty excited for this because it meant that I would have somebody who I could talk to about the series with, if he decided to play the other games, that was. So I decided that if he needed any help understanding the world of Zelda, that I could answer some questions he might have. However, he only really seemed to have one question, and to paraphrase him, it was, why is Link and everybody else an elf? You might have wondered this yourself as well, and well, the short answer is that they're not elves, which is what I told him, but my friend quickly destroyed that simple argument by saying, but they all have pointy ears. And honestly, yeah, checkmate, you got me there. Because really, if you slap a green hat onto Legolas, you've basically got yourself a live-action Link. So I ended up telling him that there was a simple real-world reason as to why all Hylians look the way they do. And that's basically that when Nintendo was making their first Zelda game, they were trying to find a way to make Link stand out in a crowd, which is tough to do on an 8-bit console. But Miyamoto is a Disney fan, and Link's overall aesthetic was based on Peter Pan with those pointy ears and green clothes. Heck, you could even argue that this Peter Pan inspiration kept going even further in with these different games as we went into Ocarina of Time, where basically all the Kokiri kids have red hair, little green hats, pointy ears, and fairies, just like Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. On top of that, they never age, and they also kidnap children like Link. As to why all the other Hylians look the way they do, I basically just made an educated guess that the other Hylians would have to look like Link because it would be kind of weird for them not to look like him. This answer seemed to be sufficient enough for my friend to not wonder about it anymore, but honestly, this answer wasn't good enough for me. Because here's the thing, I omitted a detail from my friend, which is that there are in fact humans in the Zelda universe with rounded ears. So before I get into this, just a bit of a fair warning that there's going to be a decent amount of speculation on my part, as perhaps most unshockingly about this entire video is that Nintendo really hasn't addressed the whole ear situation at all, and I don't think they're ever going to really touch upon it. But overall, I'm going to be trying to back up my ideas with facts from the different games, so it's not just like I'm throwing out random ideas. Ultimately though, just take everything I say with a grain of salt, and we're going to dive right into this mystery of what is behind these ears. Also, just a quick little clarification, but I'm going to be calling people with round ears humans and people with more pointy elf-looking ears Hylians, just so we're clear on that. Although the Zelda timeline can be a little bit whack, and Breath of the Wild kind of threw everything off, if we look at the official current timeline, we can find that all of these timelines stem from one game, which is of course Skyward Sword. If you're wondering where I think Breath of the Wild lies on this timeline, I'd say it's in its own separate universe along with the same timeline where Link from the Twilight Princess and the Skyward Sword from the Wii showed up if you played it with your right hand. Because those are the only Zelda games I know where Link uses his right hand, and until Nintendo proves me wrong, you can't tell me otherwise. This would of course also mean that Breath of the Wild started with Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword is the earliest point in the game timeline, and in it you see some of the earliest Hylians in Zelda's recorded history, and they all have pointy ears. Their goddess Hylia even reincarnated herself in the form of a mortal, which was Zelda of that time. Although there isn't any concrete evidence on this, I think that we can make an educated guess that if Hylia could reincarnate herself as a Hylian, that maybe she created them or that she had a pretty big part in their overall development. And even if that isn't true, I think it's pretty safe to say that the Hylians have very close ties with this goddess, and I think that that might have influenced the way their ears look. The main reason I think this is that because in the first two, or perhaps three if you considered Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages to be two different games, moments where we see these round-eared humans are in areas that don't take place within Hyrule. And aside from Link, they don't feature any pointy-eared characters. And so therefore, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that these people aren't related to the goddess Hylia. Link's Awakening does take place in a dream world, and if that were the only time, then you could for sure make an argument that maybe only inside of this weird whale's dreams do humans have round ears, but you can't make that argument because inside of Seasons and Ages, we're on a landmass that wasn't created by a sleepy fish. And again, I guess you can make the argument that this is on the Game Boy, so of course, things like pointy ears might be hard to do, but if we look at the official artwork, it shows them with rounded ears. And if you think that that's just an error, they also point out Link's points on the points of his ears, so it does seem pretty intentional to me. Also, I don't think that we can say that these people are like anti-Hylians or, reverse Hylians from another world where they're just the opposites, because in Majora's Mask, the people living in Termina all have pointy ears just like their main universe counterparts. You also wouldn't be able to make the argument that these characters are exclusive to the Game Boy era either, because humans show up in the Twilight Princess as well, and this was the first time I had ever actually noticed this as a kid, because it becomes a lot more apparent when you're playing this game that almost everybody you meet in the Ordana province has rounded ears, which really stands out in a 3D environment where Link has these big pointy ears. So, what gives here? It's never really stated in the game why some people have pointy ears and why some people have rounded ears. So now it's time for me to bust out the corkboard and reenact that Always Sunny scene where I try to explain my theory without looking insane. Or rather, theories, because I technically have two that are related to this. The first one is pretty simple. If we look at the timeline, Link only goes to the lands explored in the Oracle's games, as well as the one in Link's Awakening, if he was defeated in Ocarina of Time. So, maybe with Link never having been defeated, there was never this other version of Link who went to those areas because he was busy checking out Termina, / living his life, / being dead until the next Link in Twilight Princess was born. It might be fair to assume that due to this, these continents separated from Hyrule fell into disarray without a hero to come and save them. And maybe the only option these people had was to escape by boat, where they'd eventually immigrate into Hyrule, which is why we can see them in the Twilight Princess after all this time has passed. Ultimately, there's not much backing up this theory, and it might not be as crazy as you had expected, but I think the other one might be a little bit more out there, and it's actually the one that I think is more fun personally. So, in the Wind Waker game, which takes place in a different timeline, we get this really long text-heavy opening, and if you're like me, there's a good chance you never read it as a kid. Even though it's unskippable, it was easier just to stare at the pictures and not read. The thing is, there's a quote in this intro that's actually pretty relevant, and I'm going to ask my colleague and friend, Microsoft David, to read it to you.
The people believed that the hero of time would again come to save them, but the hero did not appear. Faced by an onslaught of evil, the people could do nothing but appeal to the gods. In their last hour, as doom drew nigh, they left their future in the hands of fate. What became of that kingdom? None remain who know.
In this game, a lot of time has passed since the gods flooded the world, and we're at a point where a lot of the old world has been forgotten. Goddess statues have been covered up from being ignored over time and throughout the ages, the green outfit is more of a tradition than actually meaning anything, and you may have noticed that everybody's pointy ears are a lot smaller. Now, it could be argued that this is just a design choice, because, look at their heads compared to their bodies. But I would make the argument that this is due to the fact that their tie with the goddess of Hylia has been cut, and maybe Hylians and humans are actually the same species. But when Hylia saved them and linked with them, a part of her gifts were the ears. Not sure why they would get big ears, but maybe it's related to magic or something. This idea isn't just relevant in the Wind Waker, as it actually ties into the Twilight Princess as well. Because in this game, you learn that there was a group of magic users known as the Dark Interlopers, who had used their magic in an attempt to seize control of the Triforce, among other things. To stop this, the goddess ordered the 3 light spirits to seal away what they call the Great Magic, and I think this might be related to maybe what ties magic in general to the Zelda universe, because this game features no magic meter at all. I'd like to make the argument that maybe without magic, this tie to Hylia has been cut, and like in Wind Waker, the ears have begun to shrunk down throughout the generations, and perhaps they've had more time than in Wind Waker to continue shrinking, to the point where a lot of people have reached this point where they're in this rounded state. In addition to this, these Dark Interlopers who attempted this coup aren't really seen outside of the weird Shadow Link look, but what we do know is that they were locked away in the Twilight Zone, and over time they turned into what in this game is the Twilly. And there's one thing that all of these Twillies share, and that's the fact that they have red eyes. And if we look at Midna, who herself is a Twilly, she also has these really pointy ears. just like another race in Zelda that I haven't really mentioned until now, which is the Sheikah. These people are often mistaken for other Hylians, but they're their own thing, and in Skyward Sword, it's explained by Impa that her tribe, the Sheikah, have been chosen by the goddess to watch over the Triforce, which honestly I think just further ties them to Hylia, just like the Hylians, which could explain their ears. This could also be further backed up by the fact that in Twilight Princess, there's no confirmed Sheikah characters in the entirety of the game. The one thing that comes close is a character named Impaz, who I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce the name. It's Impa with the letter Z at the end. And she lives alone in an abandoned village, which bears a lot of the Sheikah traits. All in all, to just kind of wrap things up, those are basically my theories in a nutshell about why there's human-like ears inside of Legend of Zelda. It's basically either the idea that humans just immigrated to Hyrule over time due to the fact that their homelands were destroyed and no one was there to save them, like either Link or Hylia, or that Hylians began as humans just like their counterparts on the other continents, but due to their link with the goddess, they developed those larger ears, which were lost as their attachment to magic and their past was severed. And so there's another video. I did end up losing a little bit of my recording for some reason, but I made do with what I had and I added notes into the video. Hopefully it was all clear to everyone. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like, share, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. If you learned anything, let me know. And if there's anything that you think I should know, let me know as well. Overall, though, I just hope you have a great day. However, he only really seemed to have one question, and to paraphrase, or else it'd be kind of weird for them not to look weird. No, that was not right. So it's time for me to burst out the Kirkboard.